My mom hated having a daughter. She replaced me with her stepson and sabotaged my food to teach me a lesson. My mother was never the type to bond with other women, if you catch my drift. She never made an effort to hide her disappointment about having me. In fact, she would openly admit, even with me right there, that she had always dreamed of having a son. The idea that she ended up with a daughter instead seemed, in her eyes, like some cruel joke from the universe. She would casually tell her friends that she was now stuck with me for life, as if I were some kind of burden she had to carry. Hearing that from my own mother cut deep. It wasn't just rejection, it felt like she was denying my very existence, as if being born a girl made me somehow less worthy. From as early as I can remember, I could see the stark contrast in how she treated me compared to my cousins. Whenever we were around them, she would shower them with warmth and compliments, yet when it came to me, her attitude was noticeably colder, more distant, and laced with criticism. And if I ever did anything she deemed too girly, she would scold me. She had strict rules about what I could and couldn't do. I wasn't allowed to own anything pink because, in her mind, that color was off limits for me. Dresses and skirts were out of the question, too. For years, she dressed me like a boy and only allowed me to play with toy cars and trucks. My hair was another thing she controlled. I was never allowed to grow it long because, according to her, it was too much trouble to maintain. She always insisted on cutting it short. I never understood her obsession with gender. What difference did it really make whether I was a girl or a boy? Why was that the only thing she could see when she looked at me? Why couldn't she just love me for who I was? Those thoughts swirled in my mind constantly, filling my childhood with confusion and heartache. Her words and actions planted seeds of doubt deep inside me, making me question my own worth. I wondered if I would ever be good enough for her, if I would ever live up to whatever expectations she had. It was a heavy weight to carry, knowing that to her, I was nothing more than a painful reminder of the son she never had. As if that wasn't hard enough, my mother also had a deep-seated resentment toward other women. She would constantly criticize and gossip about them, as if she couldn't stand the idea of another woman achieving success. If a female co-worker of hers got promoted, she wouldn't see it as the result of hard work. Instead, she would immediately assume that the woman must have slept her way to the top. That was her default explanation for any woman's success. The idea that a woman could succeed based on talent or effort seemed completely foreign to her. Even when one of my classmates got extra praise from a teacher, my mother would insist that the child's mother must have been having an affair with the teacher, as if that were the only logical reason for it. Hearing these things as a kid was unsettling, to say the least. It created this constant undercurrent of negativity in my life, shaping how I viewed both myself and the people around me. Her words made it difficult for me to form healthy relationships with other women. She had drilled it into my head that women were always in competition with one another, always scheming, always waiting to stab each other in the back. It was like an invisible wall between me and any potential female friends. If I did happen to befriend a girl, my mother would warn me not to trust her, reminding me that men were always more reliable. Because of that, for years, all my friends at school were boys. I was afraid of getting too close to any girls, worried that they would betray me somehow, just like my mother always warned. Then, just when I thought my world couldn't get more complicated, high school brought another upheaval. One night, my dad sat my mother down and told her he wanted a divorce. I was blindsided. I had always believed my parents had a solid, happy marriage. But as it turned out, my dad had been having an affair with a coworker. The revelation hit like a wrecking ball, shattering the illusion of our family. My mother, furious and heartbroken, wasted no time packing her bags. She took me with her, and we moved into a cheap motel. What followed was a messy, drawn-out divorce battle. My mother's anger toward my father was all-consuming, and she didn't hesitate to use me as a pawn in their fight. I became a tool for her, a way to hurt him, a way to prove she had the upper hand. Whenever I said I wanted to see my dad, she would explode, accusing me of siding with the man who had betrayed us. He cheated on us, she would scream, her voice thick with rage. How can you even think about spending time with him? To her, my desire to have a relationship with my father was a betrayal. She couldn't comprehend that I needed both of them in my life, that I still loved him despite what had happened between them. Whenever I tried to explain that, she would lash out, accusing me of being disloyal. You should be ashamed of yourself, she would snap, her words dripping with bitterness. You're just like every other woman. That remark stung more than I could put into words. It was cruel, cutting, and filled with the same deep-seated resentment she had always carried toward women. I did my best to understand her pain, but I missed my dad. No matter what had happened between him and my mother, he had always been a good father to me. Unlike her, he never spoke badly about her in front of me. When he found out that she had told me about his affair, he didn't make excuses. Instead, he apologized, taking full responsibility for what he had done. He told me that he had been deeply unhappy in his marriage and hadn't expected to fall for someone else. But even then, he made it clear that cheating had been a terrible mistake. He assured me that as I got older, he would be open to answering any questions I had. He didn't try to justify himself, he just wanted me to know the truth. Navigating my parents' divorce as an only child was one of the hardest things I've ever had to go through. Going through my parents' divorce forced me to grow up fast, but it also made me realize something important. My parents, like anyone else, were just human. They made mistakes. They had flaws. And they weren't always going to do the right thing. Even after the divorce, my dad remained a steady presence in my life. He made sure to fulfill his responsibilities, never once missing a child support payment. He also let my mother and me continue living in our family home, even though he had moved out. His reasoning was simple: he didn't want me to have to deal with the added stress of relocating to a new place on top of everything else. The only condition was that I had to live there with my mom to maintain some sense of stability. While I primarily stayed with her, I got to spend every other weekend with my dad, which allowed me to keep a relationship with both of them. But after the divorce, my mother started to change. And not for the better. I love her, I really do, but it became clear that she was obsessed with one thing: getting remarried before my dad did. His affair had wounded her pride, and she was determined to prove something. The moment their separation was finalized, she started going out more, frequenting bars and clubs in an effort to meet someone new. It didn't take long. Just 3 months after the divorce, she met Jared. Jared was a DJ and a single father to his son, Trevor. He had become a dad at a young age, and after his ex-wife left, he took on the full responsibility of raising their son. Trevor was 3 years younger than me and, at first glance, seemed like a decent kid. Jared, too, came off as a good guy. He was friendly enough, easygoing. But the real issue started when I noticed how my mother acted around Trevor. You see, my mother had always wanted a son, a wish that had never come true for her. And now, suddenly, she had one right in front of her. It was as if she saw Trevor as the boy she was meant to have. She took him shopping all the time, buying him new clothes, shoes, little gifts. She gushed about him constantly, telling her friends how amazing he was at school and how proud she was of him. At first, I thought maybe I was overreacting, that I was just being jealous. But then my dad started noticing it too, and that's when I knew it wasn't just in my head. My mother began calling him more often, asking if I could stay with him for extra days. Not because she thought it would be good for me, but because she wanted more time to go on trips with Jared and Trevor. If Jared had a gig out of town, she would tag along, leaving me behind. I tried not to let it bother me too much. I liked spending time with my dad anyway. But then, one day, my mother came back from one of her trips and dropped a bombshell: she and Jared were engaged. I didn't see that coming. They had only been dating a few months, and already they were talking about marriage. I wanted to ask if she was sure, if she had thought this through, but I knew better. Any hint of doubt from me would be seen as disloyalty, as if I wasn't happy for her. So instead, I swallowed my feelings, forced a smile, and told her I was happy for her. Then came the next shock: she announced that Jared and Trevor would be moving in with us. I was floored. This wasn't even her house to offer. It belonged to my dad, who had only let us stay there so that I could have a stable home. And as expected, when my dad found out about her plans, he was livid. He made it clear that if Jared and Trevor were going to live there, then Jared would have to start paying rent. My father wasn't about to let another man move into his house for free. My mother did not take this well. She accused him of being jealous, of trying to sabotage her happiness. She convinced herself that his refusal was some sort of petty revenge. But my dad didn't budge. He reminded her that the only reason she was still living there was because of me, and if she had such a problem with his conditions, then she would have to start paying rent herself or move out. The argument got ugly, but in the end, Jared stepped in and agreed to pay rent. And so, just like that, Jared and Trevor moved in. At first, things seemed fine. Jared took the master bedroom with my mom, and Trevor moved into the guest room. We settled into a new routine, and for a while, I actually enjoyed having a stepbrother. Trevor and I would play video games together, and for the first time, I had someone my age living in the house. After being an only child for so long, it was a nice change. But then, little by little, things started to shift. Trevor began complaining about his bed. The one in the guest room was old and uncomfortable, and understandably, it affected his sleep. Jared assured him that they would get a new one soon. But instead of buying him a bed, my mother took the one from my room and moved it into Trevor's. I came home one afternoon to find my own bed gone, replaced with the worn-out one from the guest room. I was stunned. When I asked my mother why she had done this, she brushed me off like it was nothing. "Trevor needs a good bed," she said with a dismissive wave. "It's not a big deal." I was furious. I pointed out that Jared had promised to buy a new bed for Trevor, that it wasn't fair for her to take mine. But she just shrugged. "You're older," she said. "You should learn to make sacrifices for your new family." That moment opened my eyes. Slowly but surely, it became obvious she was treating Trevor better than me. At dinner, he was always allowed to take extra helpings without question. But if I reached for more food, she would slap my hand away and scold me. "Don't be a fat cow," she would sneer. The irony was that I wasn't even overweight. I was athletic, active, and had a healthy appetite to match. But in her eyes, Trevor, being a growing boy, deserved more than I did. And then there was the baseball game. My dad had gotten tickets and wanted to take me. I was beyond excited when my dad told me he had tickets to a baseball game. I couldn't wait to go. But the moment I mentioned it to my mother, she immediately insisted that I should give my ticket to Trevor instead. Her reasoning? Because he was a boy and would enjoy it more. Of course, my dad wasn't having any of that. He refused to take Trevor in my place, and I got to go as planned. The game was amazing, and I was grateful for the time I got to spend with my dad. But that wasn't the only time my mother made me feel like an afterthought. Over and over again, she planned day trips with just Jared and Trevor, purposely leaving me out. If Trevor ever suggested that I should come along, she would quickly shut it down, saying that the three of them needed to bond as a family. And since I was older, I should understand and sit this one out. It wasn't just exclusion, it was a message. She was forming a new family, and I wasn't really a part of it. I was being pushed further and further to the sidelines, made to feel like an outsider in what was supposed to be my own home. Then, as my 18th birthday approached, my dad decided he wanted to throw me a big celebration. It wasn't just about turning 18, it was also to celebrate my high school graduation. Since our family home had a huge backyard, he planned to hire caterers and set up everything there. My mother wouldn't have to do a thing, he was handling it all. But, as expected, she wasn't happy about it. She argued that a big party was unnecessary, that we could just have a simple family dinner at a restaurant instead. My dad pushed back, explaining that I was his only child, and this was a huge milestone that deserved to be celebrated with family and friends. Even though I loved my dad's idea, my mother wasn't ready to let it go. She tried another angle. She claimed that throwing a big party for me would be unfair to Jared. He could never afford something similar for Trevor when the time came, and it wouldn't be right to make Trevor feel left out. Then, she suggested something that left me speechless. Maybe we could include Trevor in my party and celebrate him, too. This was supposed to be my day, my moment. And yet, my mother was more worried about making sure Trevor wasn't left out than actually celebrating me. But my dad had reached his limit. He made it crystal clear, Trevor wasn't his concern. This party was for his daughter, and she deserved to have a special day just for her. Then he went one step further. If she, Jared, or Trevor had a problem with that, they were all uninvited. End of discussion. That shut her down quickly. She had no choice but to back off and begrudgingly agree to let me have my party. But she wasn't done meddling. When the planning started, she suddenly had opinions on everything. She insisted that since Jared was vegan, we needed to have more vegan options at the party. I knew full well that no one else was vegan, and it would just be a waste of money, but I let it slide to avoid an argument. Then came the final straw. I love fish and wanted to include a fish dish on the menu. But my mother shot that down immediately, saying Trevor didn't like fish, so I shouldn't order it. That was it. I'd had enough. I took a deep breath and calmly told her that this was my party. I wanted food that I enjoyed, and if she, Jared, or Trevor had a problem with it, they could adjust for one night. That set her off. She exploded, accusing me of being selfish, disrespectful, and spoiled. She claimed that my dad's money was getting to my head and that I needed to learn to care about her husband and her son. Wagging her finger in my face, she told me I needed to be taught a lesson for my entitled attitude. Then she dropped the bomb. If I didn't consider what Jared and Trevor liked when planning this party, she would ground me and take away my phone. Something inside me snapped. I saw red. I was about to turn 18. I had nothing to lose. I was moving out soon anyway, so why should I keep biting my tongue? All the years of frustration, of being overlooked and dismissed, came flooding out. I yelled right back at her. I told her that I had always been considerate of Jared and Trevor, but this was my last big celebration before I left home, and I deserved to make my own choices. I told her I had put up with her behavior for years, but if she tried to punish me over this, I would call CPS and report her for the way she had emotionally and mentally tormented me all this time. I was bluffing, of course, but she didn't know that. Her face went pale. She knew that a CPS investigation could put her relationship with Jared and Trevor at risk. Trevor was still a minor, after all. Then, with all the pent-up anger I had suppressed for years, I delivered the final blow. I told her that if she no longer saw me as her daughter, then when I left for college, I would be cutting her off completely. I didn't need a mother who never put me first, who always prioritized others over me, who treated me like I was second best in my own home. For the first time, she looked shaken. She tried to backtrack, claiming I was overreacting, that all she ever wanted was for me to treat Jared and Trevor like family. But I wasn't buying it. Not anymore. After that argument, my mother seemed to finally back off when it came to my party. She barely gave her opinion anymore, and for once, I was able to plan things without her constant interference. On the day of the party, I was beyond excited. My dad had gone all out, and I was surrounded by family and friends, ready to celebrate. Jared had even offered to DJ for the event, and the atmosphere was incredible. Trevor, some of my cousins, and I had a blast on the dance floor, soaking in the energy of the night. Meanwhile, my dad was busy chatting with relatives, proudly telling them about the college I'd be attending. But there was one person who didn't quite fit into the celebration: my mother. She spent most of the evening hiding in the kitchen, nursing a margarita, making no effort to mingle with the guests. Her disinterest was obvious, and even Jared noticed how withdrawn she was. At one point, he went to talk to her, trying to convince her to join the party, but she barely responded. When it was time to cut the cake, she didn't even bother to come stand next to me. While everyone sang happy birthday, my dad and I simply went ahead, making the most of the moment despite her absence. It was a bittersweet reminder of how far apart we had grown, even on a day that was supposed to be about celebrating me. As the food was being served, I watched from a distance as my mother carefully prepared plates for Jared and Trevor, making sure they had everything they liked. I couldn't help but feel a pang of jealousy. The way she took care of them with such attention, yet barely acknowledged me, stung. I decided to hang back for a bit, waiting until most of the guests had been served before getting my own plate. That's when, out of nowhere, my mother walked up to me, holding a plate of food. I stared at her, confused. This was something she had never done for me before. She handed me the plate and, for the first time in a long time, wished me a happy birthday. I was taken aback. I asked her what she was doing, why she was suddenly doing something she had never done in all the years I could remember. She just shrugged and said that since I was 18 now, she wanted to do something special for me. I hate to admit it, but for a split second, I felt something warm in my chest. For all the years of neglect, for all the pain, there was still something comforting about having my mother serve me food, even if it was just this once. For a brief moment, it felt like she was reaching out, like maybe she was trying to mend the bridge between us. But then, as soon as I took a bite of the fish, my mouth was instantly overpowered by an unbearable amount of salt. I started coughing uncontrollably, my throat burning from the overwhelming taste. Guests turned to look as my cousins rushed to get me water, their faces filled with concern. Still sputtering, I glanced around at the other plates and asked if they had found the fish too salty. They all shook their heads, looking just as confused as I was. And then, I saw her. Across the room, my mother was watching me, her eyes locked onto mine. And that's when I noticed it, the smirk on her face. In her hand, she was casually shaking an empty salt bottle, as if to show me exactly what she had done. It hit me like a slap to the face. She had tampered with my food. I was dumbfounded. I walked up to her, doing everything I could to keep my anger in check. My voice was strained as I asked, "What are you doing? Did you really put salt in my food?" I demanded. "Why would you do something like that?" Still smirking, she acted as if it was nothing. With a cold tone, she reminded me that she had warned me not to order fish, but I had insisted. So this was her way of teaching me a lesson for being so entitled. She brushed it off as a harmless prank, saying it was meant to make sure I never argued with her again. Her words felt like a punch to the gut. I had always known she could be cruel, but this? This was malicious. I stared at her, disgusted. "You're a horrible parent," I told her, my voice filled with rage. "The fact that you would go this far just to humiliate me says everything about the kind of person you are." She just laughed, and then, as if I was nothing more than an annoyance, she turned and walked away. Something in me shifted at that moment. I wasn't just angry, I was done. But I wasn't going to let it slide. Not this time. I knew there were cameras installed around the house. I knew there was a way to expose her for what she had done. After the party, I downloaded the footage from the backyard security camera. The video was clear. It showed her dumping an entire bottle of salt onto my plate before handing it to me. Even as I write this, I can feel the rage boiling inside me. But I'm not going to confront her now. Not yet. I'm going to wait. I'm going to be smart about this. I'm moving out soon, and when I do, I will expose her. Update 1. It's been a month and a half since my last update, and I've finally moved out. My dad helped me move my things to my college dorm, and whatever I couldn't take with me is now at his place. I haven't told him about what happened with my mother yet because I know he would lose it, and I don't want to deal with that kind of confrontation. But now that I'm out of that house, I'm ready to go through with my plan. Jared and Trevor deserve to know the truth about her. People have asked if Jared ever noticed how my mother treated me. I think, deep down, he probably did. But he never interfered, maybe because he thought it wasn't his place. I don't blame him. My issue is with her, and her alone. Update 2. This morning, I decided to go through with it. I created a group chat with Jared, Trevor, and my dad. In it, I wrote a long, detailed message explaining how my mother had treated me over the years, how she had always favored Trevor, how she constantly put me second, and how she had even sabotaged my own birthday. I described how she had dumped salt on my food just to humiliate me and then laughed about it. To back up my claims, I attached the video from the security footage. At the end of my message, I asked Jared a simple question: would you really feel comfortable having your son around someone like this? Jared's response was short. He said he needed to look into it. Update 3. Since I sent that message, my phone hasn't stopped buzzing. My dad was the first to call. He wanted to know if everything I said was true and why I had never told him sooner. I broke down and admitted that I had always hoped my mother would change. That maybe, one day, she would finally put me first. He apologized over and over. Then he told me he had spent the morning yelling at my mother. And here's the best part, he's kicking her out. He told her she has 1 month to move out of his house. He had been considering it for a while, but this was the final straw. Now that he knows how she's treated me, he has no sympathy left for her. Jared also reached out. He told me he had no idea how bad things were. He admitted he had always thought it was just normal mother-daughter stuff, so he stayed out of it. But after watching the video, he finally saw the truth. When he confronted my mother, she, of course, blamed me for everything. This led to a massive fight between them, and now, their wedding has been put on hold indefinitely. Trevor and I also talked, we're good. As for my mother, she hasn't stopped calling and texting. Her messages go from angry threats to desperate pleas. But I don't care anymore. I've blocked her. I have no regrets. She finally learned not to mess with me.